Hello, welcome to the channel. Today what we're going to talk about is passing in complex objects to .NET Framework custom code in Azure Logic Apps Standard. So let's go. So why this episode? Why should we care? So I recently had a question from a customer, thanks Mike for reaching out, about how to pass in a complex object into our .NET Framework custom code feature. So if Mike had this question, I figured others would likely have this question as well, so that makes a good opportunity to create a video. Now the solution ends up being quite simple, so kudos to our engineering team for making it that way. So just to share some background, when you go ahead and use the .NET Framework custom code feature, we provision a sample, and so we have this templated experience where you put in some inputs and we'll just create a sample function so that you can go and get this running like within a couple minutes. Now, as part of that particular sample, we wanted to have a diverse set of inputs and outputs, or different types. And so that's why we see we've got an integer, we've got a string, and then we do have a complex type called a weather, also referred to as a plain old C# object, a POCO. And we wanted to show some diversity. Now what we're interested in is, instead of having those integers and strings passed in, we want to pass in a complex type. So here I've created a complex type called a weather request, and then updated the sample code to go ahead and reflect using this complex object instead of using those primitives. The output or the response value is still the same. That's a complex type. So let's go ahead, let's jump into a demo, and I'll show you how to set this all up. All right, so I've gone in and updated this sample. If you haven't seen the sample being provisioned before, go ahead and look on my channel when I announce the general availability of .NET Framework Custom Code. I walk you through the whole setup. But what I've done here is I've changed those inputs and I've created a complex object. Now, this complex object is still quite simple. It's at the bottom here. I've just got a public class, and I've got an int, and I've got a string. Those are the same values that I previously were using, but they were primitives instead of a complex object. Then all I've done is updated the code wherever I had like the primitive being used. Now I'm just referencing it, object.property for any of the custom code. So pretty simple changes there. The output is still the same. This is going to be a weather object that's being returned. Naturally, I do want to go ahead and build this code, so I'm just going to issue a .NET build command. And that will go ahead and recompile everything and make sure that my lib custom net472 folder is updated. Now let's head over to the workflow, and I've already made a change here, but let me just show you what I did. Here I have a compose object, and what I'm going to do here is just represent what that JSON payload would look like. Now if you need some help with this, I would suggest taking a look at a website like JSON to C# or C# to JSON. Those websites will sort of help you sort of craft these different messages, and also help you go ahead and generate those C# classes as well. So those become pretty valuable here in this regard. So here I'm just going to go ahead and compose this. It is hard-coded, but I naturally could go ahead and use dynamic content here if I wanted to. Now, when I go ahead and recompile the code, we're going to go ahead and update this function.json file, and we're going to update basically the parameters. We're going to redraw this card. Now, you might have to close out the workflow if you already have it open, and then reopen it. And then what you're going to see is, instead of having two individual parameters, you now have this weather request. And here we're just going to go ahead and use the compose output basically as the input here. So let's go ahead and just run the debugger here. So first we'll start up the Logic App debugger. Okay, so that's now online. That does take a few seconds. Then let's go ahead, let's attach to the functions debugger. This is much quicker. We've got some breakpoints set, so let's just go ahead and check that out. So we're just going to have a breakpoint here. And if we go ahead and open up the overview page for our workflow, we can go ahead and call this. So let's go ahead and do so now. So I also had a breakpoint set for the workflow, but we're just going to go ahead and hit F5. We're now in our custom code. If we hover over this object, right, we can see those inputs. Also, if we head over to the locals, we can see our weather request and those properties being populated. So now we can just go ahead and run through this. So I'm using the keyboard here. Otherwise, my recording software will stop. But let's just go ahead and hit F5. I think you get the picture. And if we head back over to our overview, we see that we've got a new record. Naturally, we can go ahead and look at the run history and see the values that are being populated, both inputs and outputs. So yeah, very simple explanation there. We take care of all of the deserialization and serialization when you are passing those JSON messages back and forth, and provided you've got the corresponding class defined, we're going to take care of that for you. So pretty slick, pretty harmless, and hope you enjoy using complex types inside of our .NET Framework custom code.